Okay, so the grand central station of your audio world has to be in the mixing console. All of your inputs come in and then all of your outputs go out. You get to blend all of your sound sources and send them off to the front of house speakers and then back to the performers on stage, you know, through monitors or in-ear monitors, and then also even out to recording devices or computers. Now, when I got kids, when I started, all the mixers were analog, meaning that there were a sea of faders and knobs and resistors and capacitors and transistors all under the hood. Most mixers nowadays are digital, which means actually affords a number of really great benefits. For one, the costs have dropped down dramatically. They also have a ton of effects built in because it's cheap to add effects software into a digital board. An analog board actually needs discrete components to add effects. Now, while it's pretty standard to have compressors and gates on every channel on a digital board, that would totally be cost prohibitive on an older analog board. So, in light of this, I'm actually going to start you off on an analog console. Now, why the heck would I do that? Well, a couple of reasons. Some of you will be mixing on analog consoles. Maybe there's some rooms in the facility you're in that have analog consoles, but the bigger reasons to use an analog console is it's easy to grasp signal flow and how everything works because there's a dedicated knob or button for basically everything. Now, once we understand how a standard old school mixer works, it's really easy to translate that knowledge into running any newer digital mixer. By the way, there are a lot of mixers out there, and they all have slightly different ways of doing the same task. It's really my job in this section to make you so familiar with how an average mixer works, so that you'll just be able to walk up to any mixer, and just not break a sweat. So let's see an illustration of what goes on inside a fictional mixer. Okay, let's take a made-up mixer. It's just an on-screen graphic that can kind of give us an idea of what mixers do when we actually look at real mixers in a moment. So in this fictional mixer, I have an SM58 plugged right into the first input, and the signal from that goes through the EQ and the aux ends and then goes out the left and right bus, which then goes out of the mixer and then feeds those speakers right there. Now, a lot of mixers will have, in addition to all those input channels, they will have subgroups. And here's what you can do with subgroups. So, in fact, let's look at a mixer like this. You might have seen some a naming of mixers, something like this, a 12/4/2. What that means, there's 12. In this mixer here, we have 12 input channels, 4 subgroups, and 2 outputs on this. It's one stereo channel, but technically when you're thinking about it, a stereo path is really 2 paths. So that's why they call it a 12 into 4 into 2. 12 inputs through 4 subgroups into a stereo left and right out. So let's imagine that we have a whole drum kit coming through here. You've got a kick drum, snare drum, hi-hat, toms, and overheads. That's about that's 7 inputs. And all of those could just go to the left and right, but how about we use some subgroups? Instead of just sending them to the left and the right, we could send them out to subgroups. So let's take this example here on this mixer. Sometime on a digital mixer, this will be probably done within some sort of screen, but in analog mixers, there were typically these little button assignments down here, so that instead of going this to left and right, we could send it out to a subgroup. So you had that choice between sending it out to a subgroup or directly to a left and right. Let's imagine that we wanted to take this and assign it to subgroup 1. So now the signal from that kick drum, instead of that going down through here and going over the left and right, it would not go there because we've set up to being going out to subgroup 1, it's going to go over here. So you might be thinking, well, why am I sending it over there versus just the left and right? Well, imagine this. Imagine if we set all of these to subgroup 1. That way, the output of all those input channels would come across here, and we would have control over your entire drum kit just on one fader. So in other words, if you wanted to bring the drums up and down, you do it right here. If you wanted to just change, I don't know, just to say the level of the snare drum, you do it individually across here. So another thing to think of in terms of mixes are our aux sends. And aux sends are basically a way to siphon off differing amounts of each channel, and they go somewhere. Well, where is somewhere? Well, you can use them to feed your onstage monitors. You could use them to feed your in-ear monitors, or you could use them to send to your effects sends. So let's imagine a setup like this where we have 6 aux sends. We could use the first 2 for effect sends. So say, for example, the top effect was reverb and the bottom one was delay. You could send differing amounts of each channel to have differing amounts of reverb and delay. And then you'd have also using, say, 3 and 4 to go out to on-stage monitors, and then maybe 5 and 6 to feed out to in-ear monitors. So basically 3 through 6 could be monitor mixes. A total of 6 aux sends, 2 used for effects sends and 4 used for monitor mixes. And that brings up the subject of pre or post aux sends. On most mixes you might have seen this option where you can set things up as being either pre or post. So let's fade the aux send out for the moment and just look at the fader. A fader's job is pretty simple, right? If it's set up to unity, then whatever comes in the input of that fader will, if it's set up to be unity, will basically come out. It'll be a 1-to-1. If you bump that up, then it'll amplify that signal. If you bring it down, it will attenuate that signal. That's, mixing 101 there. Okay, but now let's talk at aux sends and how this all works. Aux sends can either be set up to be pre-fader or they can be set up to be post-fader. So what are the applications for both of these? Let's start out and look at the pre-fader and an aux send. If we were to send that out to an effects send and it was set up to be pre, here's what would happen when we move that fader. We bring it up. You'll notice that the aux send has not changed because it's before that fader. If we bring it down, you can hear how the original signal has gone away, but the effect is still there because that send that goes out to that effects unit was not affected by that fader because it was before it. Remember, that was a pre-send. So let's compare that if we were to send that over to post. Now when we bring it up, notice the effect level goes up in the same relative way. If we bring it all the way down, not only has that killed the original signal, it's also killed the send to that reverb because it's post fader, right? All of that routing is happening after the fader. So let's have a look. And by the way, that's the exact reason why you would not want to set up a monitor send on a post fader, because then if you start messing around with that fader, you will start messing around with the monitor mix on stage. So a better way to do all of this is to typically set up your monitor mix to be pre and your effects sends to be post. Again, the monitor mix, when it's set up to be pre, the great thing about that, you set that knob, that monitor mix up, and it will not be affected by your fader. You do really want that to happen with your effects sends because you don't want to have phantom effects sitting around. Unless you want it for a specific situation, you'll typically want effects sends to be post.